30 years ago, when discussing La Fontaine's Le Loup et l'Agneau, an extraordinary French professor named Jacques Bourjac at the University of Iowa told his class, "Il n'y a rien de plus sérieux que le jeu." Nothing is more serious than games. 23 years ago, in a slightly different context, Tom Hutchison and Alan Waters had this to say about the theory behind a learning approach they were advocating. Describing a language is not the same as describing what enables someone to use or learn a language. We must make a distinction between what a person does, performance, and what enables them to do it, competence. Similarly, we must not confuse how people use a language with how people learn it. Then, in an opinion piece entitled "Playing to Learn" in yesterday's New York Times, Susan Engel, the director of the teaching program at Williams College, had this to say: "In order to design a curriculum that teaches what truly matters, educators should remember a basic precept of modern developmental science. Developmental precursors don't always resemble the skill to which they are leading. For example, saying the alphabet does not particularly help children learn to read. But having extended and complex conversations during toddlerhood does. Simply put, what children need to do in elementary school is not to cram for high school or college, but to develop ways of thinking and behaving that will lead to valuable knowledge and skills later on." Bourjac, Hutchison, Waters, and Engel would no doubt enjoy today's presentation. Julie Sykes is here today, among other things, to raise the question for language educators about the value for learners of virtual social spaces such as Second Life, There, and World of Warcraft, and synthetic immersive environments such as Cocolandia. Sykes, who recently received her PhD at the University of Minnesota in Spanish linguistics, I should say completed and defended, is coming to us from the University of New Mexico, where her interest in emerging technologies and L2 pragmatic acquisition has continued to flourish. Sykes has published a number of articles and presented extensively on call-related topics such as synchronous computer-mediated communication and pragmatic development, gaming and call, and lexical acquisition in digitally mediated environments. And I know I'm setting the bar kind of high, but I think this will be one of the finest and most thought-provoking talks on the area of education at CU this year. But I think Julie will have no problem hopping over that. And by the way, just so you know, Julie is a native Coloradan.
And thank you for everyone for being here. It's awesome to have such a great turnout for this talk and some things I'm really excited to talk about. I do come at this from the perspective of a language teacher and a language educator. My degree is in applied linguistics. I started digital work as a way to overcome a lot of the barriers that I was seeing in what was happening with my work. People said, you can't teach pragmatics. Everyone know what pragmatics is? Before we get going here? Pragmatics? The way we communicate and interpret meaning. So it's not what we say, but how we say it. How many people have heard that, right? About 90% of the messages we have in our life, we never actually say. It's the way we interpret. And what happens is cross-culturally that becomes really, really difficult. When refusing an invitation in Spanish, how many times do you have to refuse in general, right? What do you think? Yes. This is very interactive. I don't like to be the only one talking, so. Cinco, quizás. Three. That's the formulaic. We see between 3 and 4 refusals with insistence. No, you have to be there. Without you, this isn't going to be a great party. No, you have to. Why aren't you coming, right? What happens to native English speakers in general, right? We're not going to talk about dialect and variety because it's not really part of this. But what happens with English, you know? Usually it's 1, maybe 1.5. But the more you insist, what happens? Whoa, leave me alone. I'm trying. I will be there when I can get there, right? But none of that is encoded or said in any of the language. And so that's what I wanted my students to start getting. I wanted them to have meaningful, intercultural, multilingual relationships. And everyone said, well, it can't be done in a foreign language context. Send them abroad. right? And so I come at this from this work saying, wait a minute, what can games do to allow these much more sort of complex areas of language to be taught in these foreign language contexts? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The talk is sort of set up into three parts. First, I'm going to hopefully situate the area of digital games within a wider idea of technology and mediation and what that means for the world today and how we think about these things in our classrooms. Then I'm going to talk about two projects that I've been working on, development projects for teaching, specifically Spanish, but equally applicable to any language, pragmatics. One's a virtual space and one's a mobile environment. And then I'm going to finish up with some considerations. So anyone wanting to do work in this area, what have we learned? One, from our data collection, from the research, also from just experience as educators in the classroom. And so anyone wanting to work in this area, you have some, one leg up on where we were 2 or 3 years ago. So that's where we'll start. Mark, you can go ahead and switch. Well, I wanted to start with this video. It's from Michael Wesch. Has anyone heard of Michael Wesch before? Right, he's an anthropologist, digital actually, anthropologist from the University of Kansas, and so he's going to actually talk to us a little bit about, you can click, let's go back. I think if you just click on it.
On this.
All right. what does this mean for us? Why did I even bring it in? I spent 3 minutes of the talk, right? Things are changing. We can ignore it, we can pretend it's not happening, but it absolutely is going to change and are changing. The way we do everything, right? Many of our students today, especially as younger generations come, many people, even baby boomers, are seeing that digital world and the quote-unquote real world, although I think it's all the same, are very much intertwined one with another, right? These qualitative shifts in communicative context, purposes and genres associated with these new mediated spacers, right, require this reactive and proactive vision of what education even is. And so that's sort of the perspective that I take, saying, not reproducing traditional pedagogy in a digital space, not doing what we're doing in the classroom, because we actually do that really well in language courses a lot of the time, but preparing learners for this whole other digital world and what that means, and taking advantage of the affordances that they offer to us. I'll let you start. So, let's just get this out of the way right ahead of time, right? Who plays video games? Take 2 minutes. Okay, wow, I don't even need it. Who plays video games?
I do.
I do? Nice.
I figured we were all going to raise
our hand. All right. All of you, how many hands do we have in the room? All right. None of you are allowed to answer. The rest of us. What are some characteristics of gamers? Think about it. Take 30 seconds. Talk with someone around you. What are some characteristics of gamers? You can be honest, right?
Sentient.
They use computers.
Yeah. Well, depends on how you define computer, but yes. Are Dungeons and Dragons players gamers?
Okay, well, most of them
All
also use
right.
computers.
What are some characteristics of gamers? What are some characteristics?
Be shy.
Shy.
My partner said they're people who think outside the box.
Ah, think outside of the box.
They like the challenge.
They like a challenge.
We look for fun.
Look for fun, absolutely.
Like the rules.
Rewards.
Competitive.
Competitive.
I like to be immersed.
Like to be immersed.
Technologically skilled.
Technologically skilled. Wow, this is the most positive group I've ever asked this question. Switch the slide if you don't mind. Sorry, how many people think of this? Right? Be honest. It's all right. You can be honest. Right? All right.
I never wore the baseball cap.
I never wore the baseball cap. Right? I'll give you that. And I don't play games in the dark very often, right? I sort of like to be in the light. But all right, next. So let me ask you this. Are they gamers? It's my dad. Again? Are they? My grandfather turned 91. He plays this once a week to keep his physical activity up, right? Are they gamers? Right? What we know, with the advancement of the Wii, of course, you happen to see one of the most sort of changing game platforms. But what we're seeing is the typical gamer is shifting. So of course we still have what we call the power gamers, the images you saw before. But we have lots of other different types of people who play games for lots of different reasons. And that's also what we want to capitalize on. Twice if you don't mind. So who plays video games? Here's some famous things that we know. 5 in 10 people in the United States play video games, 39% of whom are women. So it's probably going up since we got these. Nearly half of current players play with other family members or real-world friends. Meaning they're not isolating themselves as loners, right, away, locked away in this room, but rather they're collaborating and playing with people they know all the time. I play World of Warcraft with a group of colleagues, all very well published, all very well interested in what's going on in the world, but we all play Warcraft also once a week because we felt like it was really important to play to understand what we were talking about. Recent game players in the news. Here are some people. Kevin Morbash, Assistant Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at Wharton. He's also the co-chair of Obama's FCC transition team. Right? Steve Craig, Oscar winner for what? Visual effects. Lord of the Rings, Pirates of the Caribbean, right? The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So the whole idea of who plays games, we have to sort of think, as we're thinking of these for educational purposes as well. Right? We're not ruining their lives, but hopefully we're engaging them in something different. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects that really try and draw on some of these changes. One in what's going on in the world, technologically in general. Also how we see this shift in population of game players. We're going to talk about 2 projects. One, multi-user virtual environments. Croquelandia is the space that we built for learning Spanish pragmatics. And to a mobile game, a place-based augmented reality game for learning Spanish pragmatics that takes students out into the Spanish-speaking communities of Albuquerque. I have to show you this. This is my colleague Chris Holden. And we have a promise whenever we present separate, we have crazy pictures of us in the neighborhood. So Dr. Chris Holden, mathematician at University of New Mexico, who also is very involved in the Makita project. All right. So thinking about multi-user virtual environments, I'll let you go ahead and click one more time. We have lots of different kinds of spaces that require these multiple stances and identities. All of this identity creation movement requires what? I don't know. In a mediated space, language, right? Identity is created through look of your avatar, absolutely, but also language. So there's some really interesting that happen with language in these spaces. Open persistent spaces. Anyone can give me an example of an open persistent space? Second Life, right? What happens in Second Life? Everything in there is entirely user-driven, right? Any behavior, anything you see is because of the people who use it themselves. Then we have massively multiplayer online games. Some of my very favorite entertainment things to do, by the way. What do? What's different about these two spaces?
Reward structure?
Reward structure, absolutely. What happens in MOGs is not entirely, is driven by game inherent goals, right? You have this goal-directed activity that has to happen. There are also social groups and all sorts of practices that happen outside of that. But as opposed to an open persistent space, where it's entirely user-driven, in the end, everyone's sort of reaching for that goal. Level 80, right? Well, now 90 soon, right? Anyone play Warcraft?
85.
85, I'm sorry, see? I haven't been playing, you can tell. All right, then, what I'm interested in is marrying these two. And I want to cross out serious games here. I leave it here because that's what everyone thinks of. I think all games are serious, even commercial ones. What I'm interested in, though, is drawing on this game-based behavior in a more realistic type space. So you have this user-driven behavior mixed with game behavior to create a space that's good for language learning. I call it a synthetic immersive environment, and that's what we've built and actually collected data on. Then sort of stepping away from that but within kind of the same continuum, we have these mobile augmented reality place-based games that no longer need these really interesting graphical virtual spaces. We use the real world. It's more interesting sometimes than virtual spaces. But we still draw on this game-based behavior for language learning. Right? So, what's interesting about these spaces, I'm going to use digital game sign-up as an overarching theme, but keeping in mind mostly behaviors are what we're talking about. So whatever space, if this type of behavior is happening, be it in Second Life, be it in a MOG, be it in an SIE, there's some sort of language learning hopefully happening. And that's what we're researching and trying to figure out. 1, engagement. What's engagement?
Participation.
Participation, absolutely. What else?
Focus.
Focus, absolutely. It's what gives us sort of the hook, right? It what enables people to sit down oftentimes and play games for 14 hours straight, right? In a raid, for example, without really realizing what's going on. It's different than fun, right? Fun is something different, right? Because why? How many of us get engaged in work that's not exactly enjoyable? Sometimes I'm working on an article so hard, right, to get it out, has to be to the publisher by tomorrow, and all of a sudden 6 hours just went by. I was engaged in that activity. Was it fun? Maybe. But it's much more complex than the idea of sort of just doing something because it entertains, right? Also, games are full of skills, strategies, and behaviors. 1, problem solving. You have to work together as a group to accomplish a certain goal. 2, strategic thinking. How am I going to get here? How am I going to use language well to be able to do these things? For example, in World of Warcraft, why do I use World of Warcraft? Anyone know?
Because you play it?
Because I play it, that's one. Why did I start playing Warcraft versus something else? I don't love the name of the game. The #1 most popular selling multi-user video game of all time, right? 9 billion at the moment people who play around the world. Why not start with one that's selling the most, right? But in a raid, you have to coordinate sometimes upwards of 200 people to kill 1 mob boss. Everyone has to be online doing their specific skills at a certain amount of time. Right? Okay, persuasive discourse. Getting someone to do something they don't want to do, right? I happen to be a night elf hunter. Those of you who play, You'll find it's the most cliche character. I chose that for a specific reason. But it means I'm supposed to stand in the back and shoot things. Right? I'm supposed to be targeting very important people and marking the right people. If you don't do that well, you're in big trouble. Sometimes I like to get into, Julie, stay back. Right? But persuasive discourse. What's interesting for language learning, communication has to happen to make this work. Pragmatics is critical in getting your point across. Right? So we can facilitate communicative interaction. Now imagine, instead of me killing a mob boss, imagine I had to work together with 10 of my peers to put together the most fantastic party for my neighborhood in my Spanish Study Abroad program. Maybe not quite as fun as killing the boss, but it's something you have to do. Who's going to bring the music? Who's going to do the food? When are we going to meet? What time, right? Inherent social collaboration of what's going on in the space. We see it all the time. We try to create these information gap activities, task-based learning, all kinds of things. But in this case, it's inherent in the behaviors as opposed to a practice activity that my teacher gave me to do. Experimentation. I can mess up as many times as I want. I can try out as many different identities as I would like to try out. Pragmatics, that's critical. Well, I want to be rude today. Okay, try it out. See what happens with all your virtual characters. Right? Is anyone going to be happy? Next day, no, I want to try and be really nice. And so you can try all these sort of different identities to start to understand not only a pattern of language, but how language works in the world in general. And what does this mean for my second language? It's not working. These behaviors don't work the same way that, but I think they will. Also, co-construction of the interaction, the environment, and social networks to fit individual needs. In gaming spaces, we can build scenarios that anyone wants. If I haven't heard 100 times, Professor Sykes, we really want dating. Please build us dating scenarios. How do I meet someone at a bar? How do I ask them to dance? But they can start building those even for themselves and start experimenting and figure out what's going on there. And again, they're inherently collaborative and social. If done right, if we build them in interesting ways and model, especially after something like World of Warcraft, you have to work together to be successful. And therefore, there's no more of this isolation. Here's the textbook sitting in my room. I study Spanish for 4 semesters, and all of a sudden I don't do any of it, right? I hear it all the time. Yeah, I studied Spanish. On the airplane yesterday, actually. Yeah, I studied Spanish at UNM for like 3 years, and I just don't remember any of it. Well, do you use it? Well, no, I look at my book once in a while. Right? We want them to move beyond that. We know what successful language learning looks like, and this is another way to get that. Also, really important, scaffolded, personalized feedback and real-time assessment. Instead of me saying it's right or wrong, you feel what's going on, right? As a parallel example, in World of Warcraft, what happens when you don't do well?
You die.
You die. Right? But you don't die in the sense that you're actually dead and there's blood splattered everywhere. No, you die in the sense that you get to regenerate and start again. You get to practice as many times as you want until you get it right. Imagine if our language learners weren't afraid to fail. These failure states are absolutely critical to what we want them to do all the time, right? Communicative, even post-communicative methodologies are saying, get them talking, get them speaking, get them out there. Well, yeah, they love to do it as long as they have a prompt card, because we're always sort of corrected. Let them fail 20 times and we have something really interesting for learning, right? So that's what I'm interested in. So what we did is we modeled those behaviors. We knew the parallel was there. In games this happens. This is what we want in language learning. And I wanted data to say, well, does it? I get that we're saying this might work. I was extremely skeptical. So we collected 120 hours of in-game data in a game that I built specifically for learning Spanish pragmatics. This is Gondia. Modeled after pictures that I took when I was traveling in the Spanish-speaking world. In this, they have to learn to request and apologize appropriately in Spanish. And so, what happens? Here's Otavalo, the market in Otavalo. We modeled these spaces into a 3D space, one more if you don't mind, in order to give them an opportunity to try these out. Those of you who play commercial games are going to find this is nowhere complex, right? It was built as a research prototype for that specific reason. We wanted to know if it's even worth continuing to build. And what they do in Croquelandia is they have a series of quests that they have to complete through being pragmatically appropriate or inappropriate. And their responses are all grammatically correct, the structures are there, but they're all pragmatically different. And so they start making language choices that then affect what happens in the real space. In this case, they forgot to clean their host family's house before a party and their host mother's friend shows up and is reprimanding them. They have to apologize and sort of figure out what happened here, right? And she gets really mad. If you do something wrong, she'll walk away and go tell on you, right? So the idea is to apologize to her. Well, the consequence, the feedback is what? Something that happens in the real world. If you don't apologize, well, people stay mad. If you don't request well, you don't get what you need, right? All right. So they do this through a number of different mechanisms. We have a written chat box for learner-learner negotiation, also learner-expert negotiation. We have sometimes TAs that creep in or avatars that creep in, and they happen to be real people instead of simulated characters. We have a series of quests. We also have voice chat, so we can have written chat or oral communication. We have different places that they can teleport to within Crooklandia, within the world. And then an asynchronous interactive message board where they can leave tips and hints for each other. What the entire goal is, after playing these two modules, you're better at requesting and apologizing in Spanish. And the data shows that that's the case in some cases and not in the others. Then Minty, I'll let you just click on this video. I promised my grad students I would show you this trailer. They just finished it last week. So, ooh, maybe. Maybe we won't show it. Yeah, let's try. But basically, the premise of this game is you have a murder mystery in local Albuquerque that you have to solve. And in order to solve the mystery, you have to get different clues from your fictitious family members, as well as the neighborhood itself. And so in order to get clues, you have to talk to people. The better you are, the more clues you get, right? And so inherent in this are all these pragmatic aspects of language. To give you an idea, this is Ruben. He's lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. And then this is an acequia, so water rights, all kinds of things. So we take advantage of this real place. But also then these virtual spaces to sort of simulate and marry the two together. Los Griegos is the neighborhood. Has anyone ever been to Albuquerque before? Los Griegos is up on sort of the west side, away from the university. It's a really interesting neighborhood that's been very important since the 1800s. And so there's a lot of history and lots of different levels of learning that happen here. Again, they have to discover the truth. And so in doing that, they have to talk to people and they have to use these different choices again to be able to do that. We are very excited. It's built in an open source and now we now have audio as well. In our first iteration we haven't had audio, but now we have the opportunity to listen and speak back. And so we're going to start taking advantage of that on these mobile devices as well. This is the third part, right? In piloting these, we've done extensive research. We're starting with Mentira. It's much newer than Crooklandia. We're starting to look at what happens pre-post, learning outcomes, right? What are they learning from these? As well as what's happening while they're playing the game. And based on this data, based on the findings that we have, these are some things I can tell you now. If you're interested in the numbers, if you're interested in the methods and specifics, I'm happy to talk about that during question and answer. One, we have to carefully consider the effect of learners' previous experience with virtual worlds and immersive games and mobile devices. However, we shouldn't use these as determinants of how they'll do in these particular spaces. About 85% of the people who used Crooklandia were not gamers, and they absolutely loved it. The people who played games were mixed. One really loved it, one sort of didn't, one So it doesn't have necessarily to do with what's happened before, rather whether or not they have access to what's going on. And here's an example from, from an interview from one of my students, and she captures it really well. I just think it's so cool that I've probably talked to tons of friends. I'm playing a video game for my Spanish class right now, and like, no one understands it's not like a real video game, but I just think it's like such a neat idea. And I think this captures really well what students are able to do with these types of educationally created games, right? We can valorize what's going on in commercial spaces, we can look at the behaviors, but when we create these, we're never going to have the $60 million it takes to create a space like World of Warcraft. What we can do is recreate behaviors in different ways that we can't do anywhere but these virtual spaces, right? And she's very quick to pick up on that and has no idea that it would be anything different, no other expectations, right? The other thing we see is learners, especially in the mobile game, are really excited about being part of these new projects. They're waiting for something. Yeah, we want to be involved. Yeah, I'll spend my whole summer piloting. Yeah, please, get us involved in what's going on. So, what do you think? How can you get students? What are some things you would do to get students involved, right? How would this affect your use of games in the classroom based on their experiences? Ideas? I don't know how it is at CU. You have a great center. We went down to look at the library and all the stuff down there. What do you think?
I think it's a huge improvement over just having a contextual paragraph with lines to write in words for a language test.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And students are seeing that, right? They're just happy not to have to look at a black and white sheet of paper in some cases, right? What else?
So I'm not sure I completely understand the Croquelandia and Mentira. Were these created for your course, or like how do they fit in with the language?
With the language,
program?
okay. Yeah, good question. I should have said that. Croquelandia was created. Really, it can be used in any Spanish course. It's a research prototype, so there are always the typical bugs that go with that. But it was created for 6th semester. So a typical conversation, bridging sort of course where they have to move from these 200 level or 2,000, I'm not sure what the levels are here. They have to move from that 4th semester up into the 5th and 6th semesters and have a lot of trouble doing that. What we found is what this replaced was a web quest. So what they used to have to do is go online, and they used to have to investigate some cultural topic and then come back and give an oral report on that. Most of them we were finding in our interviews did it the night before. They picked the easiest thing that they could find that would make the most profound impact with good pictures, right? Whereas with Croquelandia, what they had to do is they had 6 weeks of gameplay to be able to form their presentation, work as their group, put together. And so it replaced that activity in the course. It could easily be used in a 202 course. That's what we're starting to look at doing at the University of New Mexico. We have an interesting sequence. We have our first 3 semesters are beginning, basically, and we have 1 intermediate semester in there with a different textbook. And so we're looking at using it for something a little bit lower levels of language learning, but that can sort of help them bridge that gap a little bit earlier. So, of course, it doesn't replace the whole course, anything that's going on, but we sort of used it congruently with what's going on in the curriculum. Mentira is being used in 202 courses also at the University of New Mexico. They have right now a 5-week implementation where they get to have the iTouches. The whole 5 weeks we have a grant that we got to give them the touches. New Mexico is different in that most people actually don't have mobile devices. And so for them, even just having something in their hand for those 4 weeks is a big deal. And they get to then go out in the neighborhood. And we're working on starting for the fall, then integrating Griegos as a huge part of the curriculum itself. So not only do they learn sort of this mystery and pragmatics in the language, but they start to learn about what's going on in their local community as a central component of their curriculum. So does that answer your question? Other questions about that?
What age group?
University level. And we're looking at high schools. That's our next step, is to look at high schools. And we're looking at now, the next project, if we get our big grant that we're looking at, if we get it, but we might do it anyway, is having college students create games as part of their learning experience. Because having to produce the language in this way is much more difficult than actually having to just play the game for high school, middle school context. So all of a sudden we start bridging these sort of K through 12 plus university contexts. And that's what we're working on as our sort of next step. Mentira's only been in existence for about 7 months now, so we're just getting it off the ground. But that's the idea then, is to start bridging those 2 gaps. Mentira is completely freely available. Anyone who has an iTouch is more than welcome. I can send it to any of you. You can't get it on the App Store, but if you get it from me, you can play it, you can use it with students, you can try it out, whatever you'd like to do. Of course, it's set in Albuquerque. So that's a little bit different. But what we are doing this coming summer is an institute on creating place-based augmented reality games. Free, open source. It's through a program called ARIS, A-R-I-S, through the University of Wisconsin. It's basically a platform for building these mobile games. You don't have to have a lot of programming experience. You can actually build your own games. You could do that now, right? With just a little bit of work, you find it be really interesting, I think. Other questions before we move on? Sure.
So, if I understand it right, you've recruited people in the community. Did you have to pay them?
No, no. One thing that's really interesting about New Mexico in general, but also just the neighborhood of Griegos, is people are really concerned about the local history. So there's a historian there who does a blog every week about different places. People love to tell you stories about what's going on. That's actually where the name of the game came from, was Makita. We were talking with someone about some old folklore stories in the church and what was happening with the church, and is this true, and the nuns and the priests and all this kind of scandal. She goes in her house, she checks, she comes back out, and she goes, no, Makita. Right? But that's how it was. Everyone sort of feels connected to that place. So it's a really nice, I mean, we're lucky in that way. But we find people generally get involved. I know Chris has built games for Milwaukee, for middle school students in Milwaukee. He takes them out to ecological and scientific places, and it works equally as well for those types of places. There's one more question.
I think I was just curious, you sort of answered it, but what virtual worlds are you working in? Is this where you, all open source? How much build time is involved? I know when we talk about faculty having to make something, it's wonderful they have access to yours, but if they want to duplicate it, what's involved?
Croquelandia is a different story. Croquelandia is built in a platform called Croquet, which is an open source platform for building virtual worlds, and we built from the bottom up. So it's not built in Second Life, it's not built in Bear, it's not built in any of these sort of commercial spaces. That's a little, it takes time. It was about a year in terms of construction with the modeling. I worked with 2 undergraduate students and 1 programmer, so it was 4 of us who built Croquelandia in about a year. People interested in working, there's some other,
can you be more specific about amount of time? You said you worked with 1 programmer. How much time did that programmer?
About 30 hours a week.
It was about 30 hours a week for the programmer. Okay.
For the
and then
programmer.
the 2
undergrads were 10 hours a week. They got really into it, so I think they spent more time on it probably than they should have. We actually had to stop them and say, no, this is perfect. You guys are doing a great job. But yeah, they used it. What was great for them is they're computer science students, so they used it for their portfolios, for their senior projects. And they've both gotten really nice jobs since then, so we were pretty happy with them. Mentira, much lower bar, which is actually why we started building there. It's ecological design is what we call it, where it's reproducible, it's easy to do. I would say we spent 1 summer with 2 graduate students, and ours is extremely complex, and it was built and it's done and usable. So a teacher really interested in using Mentira, if you go to arisgames.org, A-R-I-S, games, arisgames.org, you can see there's basically it's an online platform. You build branching nodes. You don't have to do any programming. You enter the content, and that content then works in different ways. They're working on a new engine, so if you wait a month, you'll find a much even more user-friendly space to work. So that, and our pictures come straight from Flickr, from Creative Commons pictures, and we treated them to make them all look the same. You can take pictures yourself and use them. That's what we've done in some cases. So that's a much lower bar than something like Croquelandia would be. If you really want to work in virtual worlds and you don't have a lot of resources, if you're very conscious of the type of behaviors you're trying to reproduce, you can create an SIE type environment, a gaming space in Second Life. But you have to be very, very careful of what you're asking people to do there. There are a lot of things that just reproduce sort of traditional things that are happening, and that's not really what we want to do. We want to build in these game-like behaviors. And there are people who are starting to do that in interesting ways. So that would be another way, kind of a lower bar to get into that. So.
Are you using these tools mostly during class time or mostly outside of class time, or a combination of the 2? They seem kind of like one is focused more maybe on in class and your mobile one more outside, but...
Sort of a hard question. Gameplay, actual gameplay time is happening outside of class. So the idea that that's sort of something they can do on their own, we hope we've scaffolded it well enough where they feel like they can play. But then we feel really strongly, and that's actually one of my recommendations here, is that it has to be integrated with the curriculum. This isn't just something that they do as a side project and that's it, right? So we try with the Makita, with the mobile stuff, we go in once a week, every week, and we teach the class, and we do game design things that they've learned from the game from the week before in order to answer questions and do communicative type activities in order to do all sorts of things in the classroom. So it's sort of an integrated part. It's an expectation they do it, and if they don't do it, then they're not really prepared for class that day. So.
I'm curious too about the example you showed where they were trying to apologize for something and the kind of feedback they got if they got it wrong was like, "Como?" And I was wondering, or I'd like to suggest, or I have this thing I was thinking about, which was the interaction with a native speaker during gameplay. So as the student is playing, if there's, you know how they have the headsets on, or even through text, instead of the feedback just saying, you know, what did you say, or can you repeat that, or, you know, if you have a native speaker saying, you know, a Spanish person probably wouldn't understand that, and they can give you, you know, the diatribe on the mores and custom. I mean, have you thought about use of native speaker, use of feedback that's a little bit more elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And actually those responses you saw are the choices the students make, and all the feedback from the non-player character comes in the form of oral speech, so they actually react. Actually, and it comes from along with the linguist in me, right? We did all these dialogue trees and looked at different L1 data and what's going on, and so it responds based on this particular native speaker's personality. So the same responses don't have the same effect with each person. Right, so that's what, and the difficulty with our native speaker sort of interaction, the synchronous, is the majority of the students who play from Finlandia play between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. So that gives you an idea of when they're wanting to do these types of activities. And so that's some of our trick is we don't want it to feel too school-like, right? So if we require them to be there between 5 and 6 p.m., well, that all of a sudden then feels like this homework assignment that they have to do. We want it to feel like an engaging gaming environment. So we're still working on how to make that work. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more complex we can make it, the better, right? And some of the interaction comes from their peers and the people that they meet in the space. So it's 12:50 if anyone don't feel rude for getting up. I know some of you have to go, so I don't want you to feel obligated. You're more than welcome, of course, to stay, but. So let's go on to the next one. We'll just go through, these aren't very many left. One, task, and I'll let you read this, but we have to think about the types of tasks we need people to do, right? How many of us as language educators think about tasks every single day? Right? We're thinking about what we want those students to be able to do. And so what we know about gaming spaces is we need more and more and more tasks to give learners choices. So this is a sample from World of Warcraft. What happens, it's an extended quest log. You can see this time, this person right now has 18 of 20 quests, right? It's kind of an old shot. Now you can have a few more than that. There are thousands of different quests built into these gaming spaces because you want to pick and choose what you like to do. I don't happen to like search and find quests. Sometimes there's one thing you have to find to be able to complete this quest. Not fun to me. I don't enjoy searching. I don't like getting lost. So I don't play those quests, and I have that choice as a player, right? Same thing in language learning spaces. We want them to have choices about what kinds of people they want to interact with. That's a mistake we made actually in Cookie Lending. There just aren't enough tasks. Of course, that means more building, it means more time, it means more content. But hopefully, if we all start learning to share resources a little bit, we can have everyone creating quests from different places. That would be the ideal, right? Not that everyone has to create their own virtual worlds, but we start sharing resources. This infrastructure could be used very easily in French or German or Italian. We pull out the models, put new models in, and all of a sudden it works. We don't have to start from the ground up again. So that would be sort of the idea there. In Makita, the great part about these students playing, in Makita, they create their own tasks sometimes, right? I want to go down and see that church. I know it's not in our game, but let's walk over there really quick. Right? And then we start talking about the history and go through what's going on. And they really, really enjoyed this sort of mobile experience. And it a lot had to do with tasks and what they had to do there. Just to give you an idea, oops, came back one. Just to give you an idea, oh, let's skip this. Sorry. Consideration 3. Strategic implementation, we've already talked about this, right? It has to be part of our curriculum, not this sort of cool technology tool that we're trying. No, we believe that this is a central component to how learning works, and we know it works. So what are we going to do to make that become part of the classroom experience? That includes teacher buy-in. In my Croquelandia testing and research, we had 4 instructors. Of those, 2 were really involved. One was like, whatever, you do it, I don't care. And one was like, this is a terrible idea. The teacher who said it was a terrible idea to his or her class, the students didn't play. Half of the students came to class, got an A on an oral presentation, having never been in the Croquelandia spot. Who knows where that came from? There's a lot of sort of other implications to that, right? But teacher buy-in is critical to what we're doing in these spaces. And people have to get engaged with what's going on. Oops. So you can see this kind of answers your question in a visual format. What do we do with them? So they get to play. In this case, they had a game design activity in that they had to design the next level and next component of what happened after what they had just done in their first 3 levels as part of class in Spanish. So they were doing all this things. So they would go back and look up clues. Okay, let's use this clue in the next level. And then they reported on different aspects of that level back out to their peers as one sort of example of what was going on. And we were there to facilitate, answer questions, much like what happens in a normal classroom space. Let's go ahead and skip the questions so we can ask the band. We're getting close. Also, feedback is critical, right? We need to have this complex system of feedback. One, there have to be benefits of exploration and surprises, and I'll give you some examples from my favorite games here in a minute. In other words, it's worth going around and trying to do things that aren't specifically scripted in those spaces. 2, implicit feedback in the form of non-player characters, meaning those simulated characters, right? They have to give you some sort of reaction to what's going on. Shifts in in-game experiences. If you don't do well, all of a sudden it doesn't feel so fun to be in this world, right? If you accidentally run in the wrong spot, you realize, whoa, I don't want to be here. And then also explicit feedback that's specifically targeted to the individual learner, right? If they're not doing well with some of these lower level items, well, we don't want them to move on just because they've completed their quest. I want you to go back and do it again until you get it right this next time. Right? It's okay. It's totally great to keep experimenting because I bet in 3 weeks you're going to be doing something better than someone else. But don't worry about that, right? It's part of their individual gameplay or learning experience in this case. So some examples from one of my very favorite games, Mario. If you haven't played the new Super Mario Wii for 4 people, it's a great exercise in collaboration and talking. The language you have to use is awesome. My grandma was visiting for Thanksgiving, and my husband and I, and my brother and sister-in-law, we were all playing, and he just yells at the top of his lungs some profanity, right? Not so great, except that everyone starts dying laughing, and the communication that was happening between all 8 people, you know, of course, he's completely embarrassed, but everyone else thought it was great. But what happens in Mario? If you go down the right pipe, you're in a whole new world. No one ever tells you you have to do that. You have no idea how to find that. But when you do, it's really, really fun. Same thing with language learning, right? All of a sudden, you're exploring this neighborhood. Maybe you shouldn't be in, but you go in this really cool door. It's a great restaurant, right, that you can eat at. Complex system of feedback. This is my character, Adelina, my primary tune that I play. These are all the things that you get feedback on. You have to build your armor, your weapons, and this is all based on how well you're doing certain things. You have skills that you build, and in my case I have a pet, so I have my own skills and my pet skills. You have items that you can use or not use in different ways. In addition, there are mods, you don't see an example of this here, but things you can put on the game that tell you how well or not well different members of your group are doing in the game itself. If they're fighting levels, if their life is going down or up, etc. Imagine now for a minute we have these type of feedback, but for learners. Instead of having armor and weapons, right, we have places they've been, knowledge they have, facts that they can collect. Instead of having skills related to, I don't know, making people freeze, you have skills in learning how to deal with different situations and scenarios. And so we give them this type of feedback that we really like to see happening.
I was going to say, when you're the things you collect, which does exist in this game, and also in the 2 games you describe, is reputations and relationships,
yep,
and who you know and who trusts you.
Absolutely, and we've thought a lot about doing that with things like homesick meters, friendship meters, invitations to parties, right? So you can figure out, how are you fitting into this world, good or not? It happens a lot in The Sims as well. That's a really, really good point, so yeah, thank you. It's really important. But these are the kinds of feedback systems we need versus right or wrong, right? And I learned that the hard way in Croquet-Landia as well. My data shows that very, very clearly. We need something more complex than good job, not good job this time. In the case of Mentira, feedback happens in the neighborhood. You actually have to enter an address from the neighborhood. The only way to get that number is walking around and figuring out where you're supposed to go. Scavenger hunt type, right? You either do it or you don't, and you get different things based on how well you do. And this is in a very simple mobile type space, but thinking again about those feedback measures. So
Julie, I've got a question on that particular example. How do the students generate their own language?
in this case, they don't. Production happens through the collaboration that happens in the classroom and what happens then in the neighborhood themselves. So in this case, they make selections and then they go on to do the production, and the negotiation is happening around the games. We're using it as the mechanism or as the tool to facilitate that. What we're working on right now is some oral sort of speech recognition, although it's not, because that's not what I like to use, but getting them to at least use specific lexical items that we want them to notice and in the game, and we can build that in then to the space. We're not there yet. So let's get this question open. Again, learner-driven design, and I just want to highlight this really quickly because we tend to build things and then have learners evaluate them and change based on that. And what we're really working to do is actually have learners start at the very beginning working with us in something called design-based research. Anyone who's familiar with that paradigm will know. Basically, your research is following along what's going on and designing based on those findings, numerous iterations of different spaces. And that's really, really important for anyone interested in actually building games or even using games. Getting the learners themselves involved in that process. And we're going to go through this pretty quickly. So it starts with something like this usually. You draw a game on paper, typical, right? This is what's going to happen. But we want students involved even in this part. You can go to the next one. Then we took it, the first time we took it to a lab and we had them play on a Mac simulator. So they actually had to see and give us ideas about what's going on there. From the very beginning, this is way before any sort of pre-post outcomes, anything, but our research is actually looking at each of these sort of different iterations. Then we go to this. In the car, in the back of my car, I have a device. Has anyone seen one of these? MiFi, it's called. A wireless access point you can take anywhere. So we take it and leave it in the trunk of the car so we can make on-the-fly adjustments as learners are having trouble. And then finally, getting them to the actual neighborhood and figuring out and play as part of what's going on. So design is critical for that piece. So, one more. Sorry, we're skipping the questions for time's sake. But for the future, these are some recommendations. Anyone interested in either using or building, mostly using probably, there's a lot of neat stuff available. Play, play, play. I've learned more from playing games than a lot of my research data, right? I've known what questions I even wanted to pose in my research. What's going on? How are we going to investigate this? What do we care about? What don't we care about? Right? For example, comparing games versus non-games isn't something we're interested in because we actually want to know a whole different kind of learning that's going on. Also, the comparison and efficient use of currently existing spaces, commercial and educational arenas. We just talked about how hard it is to sort of create these spaces, how much time it can take. Let's use the commercial spaces. Right now I'm working on a project, another project that compares what happens on a Spanish-speaking server in World of Warcraft versus Croquet-Landia and what kind of language is happening. And what we're finding is that the skills intersect really, really well. So you learn strategic thinking, you learn how to interact with a group, you learn language socialization through these commercial game spaces. You have to become part of this gaming community, which then those skills, of course not the content, but the skills parallel really closely to become part of a new language learning community, right? But then Croquet-Landia is really great for the content and for the specifics of the language that we're looking at. And when they do, hopefully, we don't know yet, but when they do both together, we're trying to figure out what happens there. Also, task and content, really thinking about the types of tasks. And research in this area has to start targeting specific gaming tasks and specific types of quests. And what does that mean for different areas of language learning? And what doesn't it mean? Right? Typical sort of, I don't want to say this in a negative way. Typical games that reproduce what we're doing anyway for study might not be worth putting money and effort into, right? So shoot the vocabulary word. Right? That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how we can use these spaces to really transform what's going on. Right? And so thinking through that as we're building and selecting games for things that are happening. Also looking for complex feedback mechanism and trying to figure out what that really looks like for languages is something we haven't looked at yet, and that's really important. And then finally, learning outcomes assessment, right? Well, okay, great, these are great spaces, but how are we going to take them to the next space? We know a lot of great things are happening in language classrooms already. We know there are a lot of things we wish we could take to the next step, and so this is one way I think that we can do that, and one way that we're interested in pursuing sort of different types of pedagogies. So I'll open it up for more informal discussion and questions, and hopefully there's a lot there I know. So thank you.